Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with two very special guests. Our first guest today is Ruta Sepetys, and she's here to share with us her new book, The Fountains of Silence. Now, Ruta is an internationally acclaimed #1 New York Times bestselling author of historical fiction published in over 60 countries and 40 languages. She is considered a crossover novelist as her books are read by both students and adults worldwide. Winner of the Carnegie Medal, Ruta is renowned for giving voice to underrepresented history and those who experience it. Her books have won or been shortlisted for over 40 book prizes and are included in over 30 state reading lists and currently in development for film and television. So let's welcome to the show, Ruta Sepetys.
Thanks so much for having me.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. My goodness, I am so excited that we get to do this. And I have to ask, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, my books are published, thanks to my publisher, in over 60 countries. And years ago, when I was on tour for my first novel in Spain, the Spanish readers, they were so full of compassion and empathy for the hidden history in my novels, and also the people who had experienced that history. And it inspired me to ask them, well, tell me about, your history and the Spanish Civil War. And they immediately insisted that it was too difficult for an outsider to understand. And more so, it was too painful to discuss. And that broke my heart because I think that, when history remains hidden in the shadows, those who experience the history, they feel like the world has forgotten them. And it really inspired me to dig into the Spanish Civil War and specifically post-war Spain and the dictatorship of Francisco Franco.
So when you were doing the research for this book, how long did it take for you to really find the thread that led to The Fountains of Silence?
Well, my other novels, they all have threads of my personal family history. So I could write those books from the inside out, so to speak. But because I am not Spanish, I had to find a way to write this book from the outside in. And I spent over 7 years researching and writing, trying to find that thread, so to speak. And the thread came when I realized that during the dictatorship, although most countries would have nothing to do with Franco, there was one country that was doing business with the dictator, and it was the United States. And so that became my thread, an American in Spain in 1957.
So when we look at the writing of The Fountains of Silence, you can tell there's a definite love of Spain that you have incorporated in this. So was it your first time you went to Spain, you're like, oh my God, I love this place, it's amazing? Or was this something that developed for you over time?
I loved Spain instantly. But like many people, I was visiting Spain and enjoying all that Spain had to offer without truly understanding the country's history and what the people of Spain and Basque Country and Catalonia had been through. And so I kept going back. And when I told people, oh, I'm writing a novel that's set during the Franco dictatorship in Spain in the 50s, there were a few people who said, oh, I love Spain. Oh my goodness, wine and sunshine and flamenco. And they said, but remind me, who's Franco? And this really made an impression on me because when we think of dictators, we think of Hitler and Stalin and Mussolini, but we don't know much about Franco. So to your point, I was visiting Spain and I had been many times, but it was only really when I started to write the book that I was investigating Franco. But oh boy, yes, twist my arm to go and spend, time in Spain. I rented an apartment there. I traveled all over the country. The book is set in an old hotel. A hotel is a house of secrets, and the hotel is still there. And so I spent a lot of time in that hotel, digging.
Well, we talk about, you talk about the love that you have for the country and the research that you did. Was there anything that surprised you in your research that really was pivotal in your writing?
Yes. Actually, the theme of silence After the Spanish Civil War, Franco came to power and ruled for 36 years. And during that time, there was no freedom of speech. There was no freedom of the press. There was no freedom of religion. There were no equal rights. Women didn't have a right to a passport or to open a bank account without special permission. And people who were from families that had opposed Franco during the war, they were in particular peril. And feared, some, sort of retribution but what surprised me most was when I learned that it's estimated that hundreds of thousands of children were possibly stolen at birth from parents who didn't align with Spanish fascism, and they were gifted and sold to families that did align with Franco's regime. And that was just incredible. And when I started researching it and learning that there were adults who, on their parents' deathbed, their parents were telling them, I love you, and you are my child, but you're not my birth child. I bought you, and there's a possibility that your parents are still alive. And that really just shocked me.
That is a shocking, piece of history to discover. And it's interesting when you talk about the Spanish people, you talk about how there is this kind of code of silence that they carry, and how you talk about before that, they really feel like a lot of outsiders don't really understand their history. How was it writing coming from that perspective?
Well, I think for me, that is always my biggest fear, is that I'm going to miss something or I'm not going to get it right. What right do we have to history other than our own? So when I'm writing this, I take it so seriously, and I interview hundreds of people. I read nonfiction, I read dissertations, oral history reports, to really educate myself. And it was difficult. And now, the older I get, you know what I know for sure? There's so much that I don't know. So that's one of the joys of writing historical fiction, is that it's a collaborative process. And I get to work with historians and true witnesses and family members of victims. And really, it was through those people and those interviews that helped me pull this research together. And my process is a bit different than some other writers that I know. I research and write at the same time. Instead of researching and then saying, okay, I'm done with research, I'm going to start writing now, I do it at the same time, because the research interviews are often so highly emotionally charged, and there's such a sense of authenticity and emotional truth. I'm sitting with these people, they're crying, I'm crying. And so I immediately step outside, and take my notebook and even write dialogue longhand, because I fear that if I set it aside, I might miss that emotional immediacy, that maybe I won't capture that properly. So it's quite a process for me.
Well, it's easy to see why Publishers Weekly called it a gripping and often haunting historical novel, because you do capture those feelings and those emotions in your writing. And for our listeners that are new to, because this book just came out, that are new to this book, why don't you share a little bit about the storyline with us? We're not going to give away any spoilers here because we want people to pick up their own copy, but enough so that they kind of understand, who the main characters are.
Sure. So The Fountains of Silence is set in 1957 Madrid, Spain, during the dictatorship of Francisco Franco. And it follows the story of 18-year-old Daniel Matheson, the son of a Texas oil baron, who arrives in Madrid with his parents. His father is doing business with the dictatorship, Texas oil business. And at the hotel where they're staying, Daniel meets Anna, a Spanish girl whose parents were killed during the Spanish Civil War because they were Spanish Republicans. And together, Daniel and Anna embark upon a journey that unknowingly puts both of their lives and other people's lives in danger. So we have an American boy and a Spanish girl. They are desperate to connect and understand one another, but they're fenced by fear and silence and circumstance. How can they bridge those widths between them?
I love that. And your book has so much symbolism within it. In when we talk about the main characters, how are they, in a sense, fountains of silence?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. Well, as I mentioned, during the war, people remained silent. They didn't speak about what had happened during the Spanish Civil War. And then after Franco died, Spain adopted what is known as the Pact of Forgetting. They decided it was much too difficult to prosecute alleged offenses through 36 years, and they would just move forward and they would agree to forget. And in my research, I realized that the group of people that was most affected by this silence, it was the young people. The young people who had this mantra that their parents passed down: life is prettier with its mouth shut. And so instead of being able to pursue their hopes and dreams, they became fountains of silence. And so in the book, we have various young people who are representing different aspects of this history. We have a young woman who's working at an orphanage, and she is a Francoist. She's raised in a family that supports Franco. Then we have Anna and her family they live in Vallecas, and poverty and really, really struggling. We have a young bullfighter who dreams of bringing himself up, because if he is able to rise in the ranks of bullfighting, it doesn't matter, what blood runs through his veins. He's respected. And then we have this American who comes from a life of privilege, and comes from the outside in. And he's a photographer. And he, through the lens of his camera, is capturing the silence.
That is just so remarkable. What a gripping tale the Fountains of Silence is. And, and you talk in regards in your book, you talk about some things also I was completely surprised about, is that while Americans were doing business with Spain during that period of time, so the oil enterprises were continuing as well.
Yes. And that was such a great discovery for me when I was doing my research, because like I said, I needed an outside in, and Franco was quite elusive, and he wanted Spain, to be pure Spain, noble Spain, as he said. The train tracks in Spain were purposely different widths to control the flow of entries and exits. But in the 50s, in the 40s, Spain was plunged into poverty, and Franco had to open up and do business with outsiders. So in the United States, he decided to do business with the Texas oil barons and allow them to come to Spain. He gave them drilling rights. And then the hotel magnate, Conrad Hilton. You would think that the very first Hilton hotel in Europe was in Paris. No, it opened in Madrid amidst the dictatorship. And then the United States, we needed a position against the Soviets during the Cold War, a geographical position, and Franco allowed the US to open a few air bases in Spain. So we had this American movement, and also the Hollywood movie studios were given permission to shoot in Spain. So imagine, it was Frank Sinatra and Marlon Brando and Ava Gardner and many of them, and the Texas oil barons, they were doing this business, they were enjoying this life in Spain, not knowing that many of the Spanish people were suffering in silence.
That's just unreal what happened there. And just the history of this country is just, astounding. How was it when you stayed at the Hilton yourself? Because, that hotel is still in existence today.
It is. What was formerly the Castellana Hilton is now the Intercontinental in Madrid. And I have to say, the staff at the Intercontinental was just so phenomenal. I could not have done this without them. As I said, a hotel is a house of secrets. And when they put me in touch with the marketing manager, she wrote back and said, "Oh, yes, we have archives and please come." Well, I couldn't get on the plane fast enough. And the hotel was right around the corner from the American embassy. And I had read reports that at one point there was even discussion of building a secret tunnel beneath the hotel to go right to the American embassy. And the staff at the Intercontinental, they allowed me to wander the hotel at all hours. So it's 3 a.m. and I'm lurking down the hallways because I'm thinking, well, what are my characters doing at 3 a.m? And I want to feel what this is like. And there are 2 double basements in the hotel, where the staff, works. It's like an underground, city beneath that hotel. The hotel was formerly a palace that was converted into this Hilton. So it was absolutely fascinating research. And if walls could talk, oh my goodness, those layers of wallpaper peeling back the stories that are contained in that hotel. And then it posed a problem, because so many of the stories, they were so incredibly rich or salacious. when Ava Gardner lured a bellboy into her milk bath at the hotel. And I saw all these reports from the diplomats saying, this Spanish people are complaining. Ava Gardner's behaving badly. She's bringing, these bellboys into her milk bath. It's great, but what serves not my story? What serves the history? And that's kind of a challenge in my books. I have to serve the history. So, people will have to read it and see what made it in and what didn't make it in.
Oh my gosh, that's a really interesting piece there. I'm sure you found many more that were, some made it in, maybe some didn't. But, again, as you were saying, if those walls could talk, I'm sure they'd have a lot to say.
Definitely.
Well, and how much of Spain's history did you know about before writing this book or doing your research? Was it something that you were pretty new to, or did you have any idea of hey, there's a real story here that needs to be told?
Initially, my knowledge was very limited. Even my knowledge of, let's say, Basque country and Catalonia and the country of Spain. And so, no, I really came in as a newbie with so much to learn. And I think historical fiction in that way sits on the shoulders of nonfiction, of memoir, of testimony, as I said, of academic papers. And I would have been lost without all of that work that, had been done before me. And I'm so grateful for it.
When you talk about your writing process, how you were doing your research in parallel with writing the book, was this something that you took 6 months and just did it? I mean, I know you said it was over a 7-year period, or is it piece by piece by piece as you went?
It's a bit piece by piece. History provides a general outline for my novels. I have to stick to dates and places. My creativity will come in the characters. So as I'm interviewing people, I am pulling threads from those interviews and weaving them together to create composite characters. And in doing so, my hope is that I'm representing a broader human experience by pulling these threads together. So I'm pulling together threads of characters, I'm making notes, and I put a beat list together of what I consider to be emotional hits, things that I know have to be included in the story. So I have my historical framework, I'm putting together characters, and then I'm building a plot through those emotional beats. And then I pull it all together. And I know many authors work in a program called Scrivener, which for me would make so much sense, but I've never done it that way. So if you can imagine, I have all of these separate pieces, but my one mothership is I start a journal for every single novel. And in that journal, I put my research notes, my impressions, my feelings. And then as I'm writing, I go back and I read that journal almost as if it's a book itself. And then I'm carrying forward pieces of that journal into the manuscript. So it's really a very organic kind of process. And I tell people that I'm not a writer, I'm a rewriter. I rewrite my books and revise them so many times. I read the text aloud, listening for rhythm and flow. How can I find one word to substitute for 3 words? I want an economy of phrasing because these days, people don't have a lot of time. I want them to be able to read through the book at a very fast pace. I want to create a heartbeat in the story that pulls them through.
Well, you definitely did that very well. I mean, once I picked up your book, I could not put it down.
Oh,
it is a page turner. Oh, yes, you did a beautiful job with that. And I love how you also pull in and you mentioned this when we first started this discussion in regards to just the period of time, what it was like for women as well. Because, I mean, there are some comments in there that I think, the generations we have today wouldn't really understand or resonate with when we talk about women. You're prettier with your mouth shut, and these kind of things. It's like, wow, okay, there's an equality difference there as well.
Yes. And actually, in reading through some of the textbooks from the time period, and understand I also needed an interpreter because I don't speak Spanish. I can read a little bit, but for accuracy's sake, I needed an interpreter. And when I read through some of the textbooks of the time period and read the teachings and what was being said to young women and with regard to their place in the world. These teachings that said, never ever pretend to be equal to a man, and these things, I found them so fascinating that I decided that I was going to weave them into the book to give the reader, as you're going through between chapters, sort of context for what was going on. And I did that with these interstitials from the textbooks, but I also did them with some of, let's say, news clippings or oral history reports from the diplomats who were in Spain at the time. And what's interesting is it not only gives the readers in the United States an insight, but when my Spanish publisher read the book, my publisher in Madrid, they said, "Oh my goodness, we had no idea that this was the perspective of the United States." So I think it was illuminating on both sides.
That has to be so exciting to get that feedback that they're kind of going, wait a minute, we're learning something new here, It lets you know you did your research well.
Yes, it does. And, there's this awkward time of, I'll call it suspension, when the novel is done, but it's not out. And as you can imagine, I turn in my books a year or 2 years before they're actually published. And in that time period, as a writer, and I don't think that this is unique to me, all of this doubt can set in. Did I tell the story that needed to be told? Did I tell it authentically? What am I missing? And how will people perceive this? And I don't mean in insecurity about reviews but it's just this time of suspension where this elastic time period. And so getting that feedback from my Spanish publisher, it was so validating. It was such a happy day.
I can imagine. Was there ever a time where you wanted to grab the manuscript back from the publisher and say, hey, I need to do a little bit more rewrite here and just kind of add more to it? Or once it was in, you were done?
Well, because I'm such a notorious rewriter, I mean, I rewrite the books literally hundreds of times. And I have to say, I'm so grateful to my U.S. publisher, Philomel, which is a division of Penguin Random House. My editor allows me that breathing room, and she also is very meticulous. And so by the time we say, you know what, this is done, it really is done. Where I do go back is if I catch an error and that even a copy editor didn't catch. Let's say someone who was alive during the time period reads the work and said, oh no, you got this wrong. This street is not, or this building doesn't face westward, or something like that. Then in subsequent editions, we will make a correction. But when it's done, for me, it's done. And it's interesting. I don't read my books after they're done. I'm so excited to go on to the next novel and the next book that I'm working on that I don't read them. And recently at a book event, someone asked me a question about my first novel that was released nearly 10 years ago. And I had to stop and think, wait, what are they talking about? Oh, yes. I did write that.
Well, it's because you've done so many rewrites as you're going in doing the story. I could see where it's just kind of developing and developing. You're on to the next,
Exactly.
Mm. Well, where can our listeners connect with you, Ruta, and learn more about not just this book, but your other books and be part of your community?
Thank you for asking and giving me that opportunity, because I would love to connect with your listeners. My name is complex, so the easier way to direct them is if they go to historyishiding.com. That takes historyishiding.com, takes them right to my website, rutasepetys.com. And I'm in all the usual places as well. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at Ruta Sepetys.
Well, Ruta, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about this hidden history.
Well, thank you, Ruta. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Fountains of Silence. The Fountains of Silence are available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
If not me, then who? This ethos is driving the Travis Manion Foundation to empower veterans and families of fallen heroes to develop character in future generations. In 2007, Marine First Lieutenant Travis Manion was killed in Iraq while saving his wounded teammates. Travis's legacy lives on in the 5 words he spoke before leaving for his final deployment. If not me, then who? Guided by this mantra, veterans continue their service, developing strong relationships in the community, and thrive in their post-military lives. Visit TravisManion.org and ensure the character of our nation's heroes lives on in the next generation. If not me, then who?
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. Our next special guest today is Abbi Waxman, and she's here to share with us her new novel, The Bookish Life of Nina Hill. Now, Abbi was born in England in 1970, the oldest child of 2 copywriters who she says should never have been together in the first place. One night, her father ran off to buy cigarettes and never came back. Her mother began a highly successful career writing crime fiction. She encouraged Abbi and her sister Emily to read anything and everything they can pull down from the shelves, and they did. Abbi went into advertising, later working as a copywriter, and then a creative director at various advertising agencies in London and New York. So let's welcome to the show, Abbi Waxman.
It's a pleasure to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book. And my goodness, once I picked it up, I couldn't put it down. It is such a great read.
Well, I'm glad. And also I covered the cover with glue, which helps.
Well, hey, either way, I wouldn't be able to put it down even without the glue.
Good. Well, that's good.
So
because I was taking a long time every night, just going to the bookstores, painting them with glue.
Hey, do you know what? That's a clever idea.
Yeah. Clever and illegal.
A little bit of both. Well, yeah. And so what inspired you to write this book? Because I know you've written some other books that have done exceedingly well.
What the inspiration for this one actually it was a few things. First of all, when I went on tour last year for my previous book, Other People's Houses, I sort of trickled up the West Coast and went to, it wasn't even a very big tour, but maybe half a dozen bookstores. And in all of them, there were young people working, mostly women, although some guys, and they all were these sort of millennial people. I'm Generation X myself, and they were all kind of awesome. Like, they were fun. They were smart, really smart. They really, really, really loved books. They were sort of into popular culture. They were quirky. They wore cool shoes. In general, I was like smitten with all of them. And so I decided I wanted to write a book where the heroine was one of these people. And not just because they were awesome, but also as a thank you to the independent booksellers and book lovers and librarians who I've had the pleasure of meeting over the last several years. So that was the inspiration.
Well, I know that you called Nina your love letter to millennials, and I could see where that inspiration comes from with all the people that you've met across your journey.
Yeah, I do think millennials get a bad rap, and I don't fully understand it, except I think that media likes to, stir trouble, and it's much easier to stir trouble between the generations than it is to, encourage us to band together. So I suspect that is what is at play. But from my experience, millennials are very well read, very immersed in popular culture, very able to sort of meta-analyze what they read and see. So they'll go see a movie, then they'll go online and read several different analyses of that movie. They'll discuss its parallels with literature or its parallels with TV shows. Like, they just are very meta about these things. And I really like that. I think it's really fun. And I think that they got sold a bill of goods. This generation really came out of college with enormous debt. They sort of came of age during the financial crisis, and at the same time, everybody's sort of jumping all over them for spending too much on coffee. So it's, I don't know, I like to protect the underdog. And at the moment, millennials are being treated like the underdog. But that's okay, because they'll take over soon enough and push us all out to sea on a log.
Isn't that the truth?
And I wouldn't blame them. I really wouldn't. Make a raft, stick all the boomers on the raft, and then the Generation X shortly behind, and just push us out to sea.
Well, you probably are saved, considering you wrote this book and it's a love letter to them. So they probably will let you hang out with them.
Well, I think they'll take it into consideration. Whether it will give me a full pardon, who knows?
Well, why don't you share a little bit about the bookish life of Nina Hill for our listeners?
Okay, so Nina is a young woman who is quite shy and introverted, but who also has a life. She's not a shut-in or a recluse. She works in a bookstore. She has a trivia team. She has book clubs she attends, but she also is very careful to protect her alone time in order to be able to sort of, get her energy back. She finds being with a lot of people quite tiring. And she has her life at the beginning of the book really where she wants it. She's an avid planner user, and she likes to prescribe her activities down to the last minute of every day. And then at the beginning of the book, she's the only child of a single mother, or so she thinks. And it turns out that she does have a father. I mean, of course she has a father, but that her mother did know who her father was, and that he has just died and left her a vast extended family, all of whom are a little bit crazy, and all of whom are dying to meet her and bring her into the fold of this nutso clan. And of course, there couldn't be anything worse as far as she's concerned. It's a complete disaster. And so the book is about how she comes to terms with the fact that she now has 1 million relatives, and B, how she stays true to herself through that process. And there's a little bit of romance. It's not, I wouldn't call it a romance novel, because it's not about the heroine getting rescued by some handsome chap. But there is a little bit of romance. There's a lot of trivia. There's a lot of popular culture. And that's really it. I hope that people like it.
Oh, I'm sure that they will. Your book has gotten such great reviews from just pretty much everywhere. And so it's definitely a book worth picking up and reading. And I love how you talk about, Nina being like this self-proclaimed introvert, but, it's interesting because I think your book also leans towards people who are extroverts being able to enjoy reading as well.
Yes. I mean, I think that this is the wonderful thing about books, of course, is that it doesn't, a book doesn't care whether you like to stay in or go out, right? It doesn't really, it just exists for you. And so whether you one of those people who loves to go out and be surrounded by a lot of people energy, or whether you're one of those people who likes to stay in and read in peace, it doesn't matter. The book exists equally for every kind of person. And Nina is an introvert, but she is not antisocial. She likes people. She likes to hang out with people. She just finds it a little bit tiring. And I think that's true for a lot of people. And I think that there is a tendency to view introverts as, and I think I've said this before, as failed extroverts. And that is not the case at all. You don't say that extroverts are failed introverts, but extroverts usually drive the conversation because they're so loud. And so I think introverts, get to feel a little bit embarrassed about being introverts. And I say, no, rise up quietly and separately in your own homes and claim the power of introversion.
I love that. Because it really is just saying, hey, be proud of who it is that you are and own it. And, your book is really kind of a tribute to that, is just being proud of who you are, even though it could be wacky and crazy and all that.
Yeah, you have to go with what you've got, right? You have to go with what you got. Everyone else is taken. I think it was Dr. Seuss that said that. You have to be yourself. So, or was it Oscar Wilde? One of those chaps.
Mm-hmm. Well, did you use any of your own experiences, your personal experiences, maybe hobbies or likes and dislikes, as you were writing the character Nina?
Well, certainly Nina has read all the same books and seen all the same movies as I have, unsurprisingly. And so I did definitely relax into being able to talk about movies and books as much as I wanted, which was really, really fun. Because normally you have to be sort of somewhat careful when you're writing a book not to make it too time specific. Like if you make lots of current references, then you worry that, in 10 years, anyone who picks up the book is going to be like, what's Love Island, or whatever it is. I didn't actually reference Love Island because it wasn't out at the time. But you know what I mean? But for this book, I was just like, you know what? I don't care about this. I don't think people are going to be reading this book in 50 years. So I'm just going to go ahead and just fully embrace the moment and just let her be who she is right now at this point in time. That was really, really fun. That was really, really fun. I enjoyed it.
Was it different writing the perspective of a millennial coming from a Generation X?
Yes, insofar as, I was very concerned all the way through that I wasn't messing it up. But ultimately, and I'm really lucky, I have a lot of, it sounds funny, I have a lot of millennial friends. That makes me sound, it sounds a bit weird, but I have younger children, and many of their babysitters sort of got absorbed into my family. And then as they grew up, I sort of watched this generation of mostly young women come of age and then become fully adults. These are girls I knew first when they were 18 or 19. Now they're in their early 30s. And so I've watched this generation grow. And of course, the bottom line is that people are the same. The generational experiences are specific, but people's hopes and fears and dreams and interests are exactly the same. Everybody's worried, and has been since the dawn of time, that they are fulfilling a purpose, or that they are, friendly and well-liked, that they are trustworthy, that they are good people. Like all of those things motivate everybody just the same, regardless of their generation. So that part wasn't the worry. The worry was just that I would sound like a really middle-aged person trying to sound young. But so far, the readers have said that it's fine and that it's spot on. So that's good. Got away with it.
Well, and you set the storyline in the LA area. Was there a specific reason that you did that?
Just sheer laziness, I think, on my part. I didn't want to have to travel very far to do my research. And also, I really love my neighborhood. I'm really lucky. I live in this little neighborhood, Larchmont, which is where the first 3 books are set. And it behaves in this sort of anomalously village-like way within this big city. So you walk, it has a main high street, and if you walk up the street, you will meet people you know. It just is that way. Because there is so much that you can do within the neighborhood, and so you don't need to go out of it. There's a grocery store, there's bookstores, there's ice cream stores, there's a drugstore. It's like you don't have to go very far. And so it behaves in a very interesting way, and there's lots and lots and lots of stories going on all the time, as there are in any small village. So yeah, that was, and I love LA. It gets people are snobbish about it, but I love it.
Well, there are so many great parts of LA, and to have that one, that one piece pulled out and being able to write about it, because I think a lot of times people think of LA and they're like, well, they think downtown LA. They don't realize there's lots of different parts to it.
Yeah, it's like in this way, it sort of resembles London, which I went to college in London, and London has been variously described as a series of small towns joined together, and LA is actually quite like that too. It's very, very spread out, and because you have to sort of you have to drive because there isn't a good public transportation system yet, you can be quite isolated. So each little neighborhood has developed quite a distinct character. You know, the West Side is very different from the East Side. And Larchmont is very different from, you know, Santa Monica, for example. So all of these little towns have their own character. So it's pleasant. There's lots and lots of life in LA. I think I could write, you know, a dozen books, 20 books here and never cover the same ground.
Oh, I'm sure. I don't doubt that. Well, and it's interesting in your book, Nina, also, you've included pages from Nina's planner. And I'd love for you to share with us, like, what that says about Nina, her thought process, and, you know, what is it conveying to the reader?
Well, hopefully, I mean, first of all, the planner pages, which I use to sort of separate up the days, you know, over the sort of the span of action of the book, started out as sort of a cheat for me. I struggle with plotting and structure. I think that's my biggest challenge as a writer. And so I did it in my first book as well, use some kind of cheater's shortcut to give the book structure. I don't necessarily always think it's going to end up being in the book, but in this particular case, it did. The planner pages sort of show how she starts each day. And I think that was something I had a lot of empathy for, that you start each day thinking, okay, you know, today I'm going to crush it. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to exercise. I'm going to be pleasant to everybody. You know what I mean? Like, you start each day full of optimism. And then often by 2 or 3 o'clock, you're like, this is not going to work. I'm going home, climbing under the bed, and I'm going to rock back and forth until the day is over. So, you know, I think we all start out each day hopeful, and it doesn't always go the way we want. So the planner pages were a way of showing how she was starting each day. And then often you would see on the next day that she had moved some of her goals from the previous day across, or maybe she had crossed out some stuff by the end of the day. So it was just another way of showing how her mood and mental state was changing over the course of the book. And it was just fun to do. You know, it was entertaining.
Well, I'm glad that you included that, because it really does give the reader kind of a point of reference for where Nina is in her mind and how things are coming together for her. Because you're right, all of us we've got all these great things on our calendar that sometimes ends up getting pushed over to the next day, next week, next month.
Or never.
Or never is right.
I still really haven't ever joined a spin class. You know, like, I think I will. I hope I will, but you and I both know it probably is never going to happen.
So, yeah, I mean, there are lots of, I've got a few things on my calendar too that do get pushed off, and we'll see if those ever happen. You know, it's interesting though, in this book, you also have a cat named Phil. So how did he get incorporated in that, and what's his significance?
So I was like, so Phil's in this one, there's a dog in the first one, there's a dog in the second one. I really, I can't imagine writing a book that doesn't have animals in it, although the one I just handed in doesn't, because it's a road trip book, so they don't have an animal with them. And after I was actually reading through it the other day, and I'm like, what is wrong with this book? And I'm like, oh my God, there's no dog. So I don't know how I'm going to solve that problem. But I love to write animal characters, and I love to write about the relationship between people and their pets, because I have a lot of animals myself, and it's very often the one relationship in my day that is always positive. You know, there's really very little that my pet cats or dogs or chickens do that truly upsets me, and much that they do that makes me happy. So I feel like they are incredibly generous friends and companions. And so I just love to write about them, and I love to write about what they bring to each character's life. And in Nina's case, you know, Phil is her confidant. He is her, you know, sometimes her mocking conscience, you know, and she just loves him very much. And I think having a relationship like that is wonderful in real life and enjoyable in books. I always love it when other writers write about animals. So that's why I do it.
Well, I love how Phil is just a little bit sassy, you know, but again, that's a cat.
That's cats. Yeah, I mean, cats, generally speaking, are a little bit, you know, if they had eyebrows, one would be permanently raised. Let's face it. So it's, yeah, I love cats. They're awesome.
And without a doubt. Well, okay. And, one of the things that you address in your book too, which I found interesting, because we've got so many millennials dealing with this right now, is anxiety. And
Yeah.
so what was the thought process in incorporating that in this story?
Well, I think, to your point, a lot of people experience anxiety on a more regular basis than you would think. Luckily, I think people are talking about it a lot more than they used to. I've certainly experienced it at different times in my life. Some of my children have experienced it. Many people, if not most people I know, have at least at certain times in their life struggled to push through with anxiety or struggled to not let it take over. And so I wanted to both talk about anxiety and have a main character who struggled with it, but who also was able to continue with her life. Because although it can be very debilitating, you can overcome it. You can work to sort of not incorporate it into your life, but to have it be a part of your life that isn't bringing you down. It can be super destructive. It can be super isolating. But I also wanted to write about a character who sort of not gives into her anxiety, but respects her need for space and time to recover when she becomes anxious, who asks for space and time and gets it. I think it's really hard when you're not an anxious person and you see someone struggling to not just say, everything's fine. Why are you worried? There's nothing to worry about. Everything's okay. And not really understand that it's not really about what's really going on. It's a disorder, and different people handle it in different ways, but Nina needs space and time and solitude to recover. And she has to balance her need for that with her desire to be in a relationship or to have friends, or, so I wanted to write about that balancing act. I think it's quite a common struggle.
Well, I'm glad that you included that. There's so many people right now then that, especially when we look at the millennials that are dealing with anxiety and not really sure how to handle those stresses.
Well, to be fair, not to sound like millennials aren't strong people, they are, but they face an enormous burden that previous generations haven't, which is that they are enormously exposed, both individually and culturally. Like everybody's talking about them, and they actually are talking about them. And when you're a young person, you think everybody's talking about you, but you come to realize as you get older that they're not. Then, if you're a millennial, you realize they really are. They really are talking about you. And they are constantly exposed, and individually, they post their lives get commented on by strangers. If they do something wrong, it exists forever. Like if someone had been recording the crap I got up to when I was, in my early 20s to late 20s, I would probably never leave the house, but luckily I had privacy because Generation X had that, and they don't. So, and they have debt, and they have, this concept of work being everything that must be every aspect of their life, must be hustle, hustle, hustle. And obviously we're talking purely about the West, and the culture that we're in, but it's, I just think they're sort of getting the shaft, honestly.
Well, your book really highlights a lot of these different, I wouldn't say issues, but just different things to be made aware of, because you're right. I mean, gosh, if I look back when I was, 20, and if everything was being captured, who would want to go outside? Who would want to do anything? Because, you're having your whole life videoed and it's out there forever, Exactly.
And let's face it, most of us in our early 20s are not the people that we end up, 10 years later. Like a lot changes during that first decade of adulthood. Mm-hmm. And, it's, I just think, but the other thing about it is that despite all of this, I have found my millennial friends to be amongst the most funny and humorous and sort of skeptical and, as I said, kind of meta about it, which I find fascinating. Like they go through all of this stuff, and then they sort of are able to step outside themselves and sort of, I don't know, see the lighter side or the funnier side of it. Now, whether that is true for everybody, of course, I'm sure it's not, but certainly the people that I have been lucky enough to be friends with, they get upset, but they do tend to eventually just see the funny side and be wry about it. And of course, that's ultimately what will save us all.
Well, and so what are some of the things that you want readers to take away from your book?
Well, I hope that they, on the most obvious, in the most obvious sense, I want them to just enjoy it. Like this is not the great American novel. This is not, deep philosophical thought this is a hopefully fun read with lots of, affection for books and the main character and fun. And so I hope at the very least it's, a day or two or three of mindless distraction. And then my job will be done. And then hopefully I hope that they will appreciate how much writers appreciate readers. Like we really, there is no point to us without them. So, I mean, I would write whether anyone was reading it or not, but that's my problem. But having people read your work and like it is the most wonderful thing. And being able to write a character who loves books as much as I do is really pure joy.
Well, that's, you just have to love that, because I know people are saying when they read your books, it feels like the main characters are like their best friends.
Well, that's good. And yeah, I mean, that is a lovely thing to hear. And I hope that the book is doing well because so many people are actually like this. And I think that lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people love books. And I think that we forget, because so much is about visual media, we forget how much joy books and ideas and stories in whatever format, whether it's digital or paper or whatever, I have no axe to grind in that particular battle, that they really are deeply, deeply enjoyable to be able to sort of step outside of yourself and have your own mind and your own imagination provide the visuals is a very different experience than watching TV or movies, which are also fun, but it's a different thing. And I think ultimately at the end of the day, I love all media, but books are my first love.
Of course. Well, and so Abbi, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more, not just about this book, but the other books that you've written as well?
Well, the best place to see about the other books is my website, abbiwaxman.com, which has sort of synopses and sample chapters of the other couple of books. And then they can reach me on Instagram, which I believe is the classic Abbi Waxman, or at Abbi Waxman, or whatever the heck it is. Instagram is really the only social media I do. I don't go on Facebook. I don't do Twitter because it makes me angry. And so that's the best place to reach me.
Well, Abbi, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Oh, it's really been a huge pleasure. Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you, Abbi. It's been such a joy to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, The Bookish Life of Nina Hill. The Bookish Life of Nina Hill is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.